See, you found the goat.
The Rings of Power is Amazon's attempt at a prequel to The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Theirs is a fantasy story that covers the period of time where the Rings of Power got made by the Dark Lord Sauron. And just none of this story holds water. In episode 2, when the elves were deciding what to do about the rampaging orc horde destroying the southlands of Middle-earth, we saw the elves planning, and were told by an elven general that according to elven spies, the Dark Lord Sauron had been spotted going into Mordor.
Sauron.
Our spies indicate that Sauron was last seen travelling into Mordor. We believe he intends to supplant Adar and claim his armies.
So, I'm supposed to believe that somehow the elven spies are so good that they saw one man who they didn't know and they weren't even looking for leaving the city of Eregion and going into Mordor, but they didn't spot him coming back. And I'm also supposed to believe that the very same elven spies are also so inept that they didn't spot an entire army of thousands of orcs marching into elven lands right up to the elves' largest city, the same city of Eregion that Sauron was somehow seen leaving, while the orc army were marching on foot carrying burning torches and beating drums. This show expects me to believe these two things at the same time, and this for me is a story losing all suspension of disbelief. This is untenable. The writing on this show is complete garbage. I hate this show. If I wasn't reviewing it, I would have tuned out already. None of the elven spies noticed this coming. This. The best defence I can give of this is maybe the elven spies had been corrupted by Sauron. Off camera, of course, because the show never actually demonstrates any of that. But Sauron is shown warping other people's minds in this episode. Sauron just takes over command of the elven city and nobody says anything. I watched this with other people as usual, and when it got to the end, I asked them what they thought of it, and one quite melodramatically said, "I don't want to talk about it." A woman in the group said, "I'm confused," and someone else said there was not enough Beric the horse. So to balance out the pain and apologise for this one, I'm going to add footage to this video of the Spanish pole vaulter Clara Fernandez. You see, I'm just a big fan of female sporting excellence, and yes, that is the excuse I'm going with. I'm not even sure what to make of this episode. Yet again, I didn't even manage to fall asleep. This one, if anything, made me laugh because it was just so pitiful.
Now, there simply cannot be a fault in your rings.
Now, to explain why I find this funny, you need to understand that in British English, ring is often used as coarse slang for someone's bottom, specifically the ring-shaped hole in it. So when they say,
"Did you alter the dwarven rings, yes or no?"
No, we did.
in English slang that sounds really, really bad. And why do they all sound so camp?
Oh, Owl's beard! Enough with the quail sauce. Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
When the episode starts, Arundi the elf is running north after the orc army, and at least he didn't just appear next to them this time. He's still going to run about 1,000 miles in what the show makes look like a day, but the show has no grasp of time, and I have no grasp of time in this show. This is a show that cut away from a plotline, and when it cut back to it, a full city had been built off camera. This show is like a parody. Arundi was just running with some hero music over the top. And he's still a considerably less viable hero for me than Beric the horse was. The horse is frankly a better and more expressive actor, and this scene just confuses me, because we have Arondir hear two orc deserters coming through the woods, so he hides and lets them pass. He stands up, and another orc is just jumping down off of a rock to attack him from behind instantly. He gets rid of that one, and then the other two orcs that had passed and walked on hear the noise of the fight, and by the next shot, the orcs have teleported to either side of him, and the deserters have now decided that they want to fight. The show doesn't seem able to decide what it wants the orcs to be. In one scene it will be humanising the orcs because the show is trying to socially engineer the audience, and by the next scene the heroes will be merrily slaughtering them again, like they're still the monsters from the Peter Jackson films. And were the orcs that Arondir just did in there even armed? I didn't see weapons drawn. At the point where an orc just wants to go home and see his wife and child, just cutting them down for being an orc has long ceased to be ethical or heroic. Now, having orcs just teleporting around, is that good direction? Maybe not, but all of the directors for this season are women, so Amazon clearly have their priorities in the right place. By not having any male directors at all, they've ensured that the directing team is now 100% diverse. If only they paid as much attention to the story as they do the identity politics, but they don't. It's just a delivery method for the cack-handed attempts at social engineering. Galadriel would just attack an orc army solo because feminism, even if it makes no sense in the story and it just gets her captured. Groups of characters will be diverse even if it makes no sense in the context of the story. Eagle-eyed viewers may have spotted that in the village of the Hobbit things, they appear to have had a hobbit with Down syndrome. Orcs will suddenly get family values because the show has firm ideas to push on race determinism. Disa the dwarf is worried about the dwarves digging deeper into the earth and uncovering some kind of horrible monster, so she sings at them. I burst out laughing. I have a sneaking suspicion the makers of the show were trying to send a message about a powerful black woman changing the world with her voice, and to do that they chose Captain Hey-Ho from Swashbuckle, playing the first female dwarf of colour. I hate this show. I'm also getting a sinking feeling that Kieran Hines, playing the character of Dark Wizard, is going to turn out to be Saruman, and it really is going to F up the story of Lord of the Rings. Meanwhile, the elves have still not noticed the massive orc army that's now surrounded their city, and the show continues to be abysmal on metalworking and metallurgy. The elves are struggling to finish the 9 rings of power for men. They're still adding unprocessed ore into smelts, so their perfectly balanced magic rings would have bits of sand and random crud in them, and they failed so much that there's now a pile of random metal bits on the floor, and they can't make any more ring attempts because they've run out of mithril, we're told. The silvery metal that they get from the dwarves, and have they? Can they not just reuse the piles of metals on the floor? Or is it all magic at this point? I hate this show. Sauron is busy gaslighting and creepily manipulating everyone around him, so in retrospect, it's no wonder the media view him as a hero, role model and someone they have to write articles about one-handed. He can now completely warp Celebrimbor's mind to make him see an elven city not besieged by orcs, and don't even ask where the orcs just suddenly got trebuchets from, or why Sauron made all of this happen in the first place. I don't see how this helps him make the Rings of Power. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor tells Sauron that the dwarves are late with their shipment of mithril for the elves, so Sauron goes to see the dwarves to try and make a deal, and this whole scene for me was bizarre, because both Sauron and the dwarves act like the elves and dwarves never had a deal in the first place, and I have no idea what the story's even supposed to be, because all of this dealing happened off camera. Sauron tries to make a deal with the dwarves and just none of this makes sense. If they had a deal and the dwarves broke it, surely Sauron's first words should have been, "Why is the shipment of mithril from you late?" Instead, both him and the dwarves act like there never was supposed to be a shipment. I asked everyone I watched this show with, did you find this episode confusing? And they all said yes, including me for this part. The Dwarven King says no to Sauron about a deal for mithril. He wants the mithril for himself to make weapons and armour for the dwarves, and then later Sauron turns up back at the Elven City with a load of mithril he got off camera from the dwarves. This story is a mess. Adar and the orcs still have the elf Galadriel as a captive, and none of this makes sense either. Because just last season, Galadriel had Adar captive and gleefully talked to him about how she wanted to genocide all of the orcs. So Adar, in this, just let her put a knife to his throat and suggest that they now work together to fight Sauron. Sauron can be damaged, it appears, by the crown of Morgoth that Adar stabbed him with, which just makes it even more stupid that Sauron A, kept this around, and B, put it in the hands of someone that wanted to harm him. The other story threads in this episode are frankly a waste of time. As if the whole episode wasn't really. In Numenor, the Queen gets eaten and spat out by a giant sea monster. The hobbits talk a lot. Poppy, the female Samwise, has an interracial hobbit relationship, and Gandalf goes looking for a stick. The elves in Eregion are worried that the usual traders and artisans that come to their gates are not there, and I realise I have no idea where traders and artisans would even be coming from in this world, or who they're supposed to be, because this world feels so small and just has no coherency about it. The massive continent just feels really empty and devoid of life. This is a map of Middle-earth. In nearly 2 seasons of the show, this is what we've seen. There are some elves here on the west coast. There's an elven city, Eregion, here. There are the dwarves in Khazad-dûm here. There are humans in Numenor, somewhere out here. There are orcs around here and some burnt towns. There's a caravan of a few dozen Harfoots somewhere here. It feels like the continent is almost entirely empty.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.